As we saw in the previous mini-lecture, the early Vedic peoples had hymns that they recited as they performed a variety of different rituals, most notably those involving making sacrifices into a fire. They had a pantheon of deities that was headed up by Indra, the most popular of the deities, who is in fact connected to Zeus. They were very similar personalities. In Greece, of course, you have Zeus being a kind of thunder god, and he has this lightning bolt that he uses as a weapon. And Indra is quite similar, and he's a war god and a storm god. And so we see that emphasis on this kind of performance of religious rituals centering on the fire. But when they begin to move eastward into the Ganges plain, as you can see in this map over here, that they change their lifestyle in some significant ways. Most notably, they become less herders, where they're migrating around looking for grass for their herds to graze on, and they begin to settle down and become more agrarian. And one of the products of that is that they start to mix with the indigenous peoples in ways that they presumably hadn't mixed before. We certainly get the sense in the early Vedic period that they're very separate and distinct from the other dominant numerically groups of people that live there, even though they are the most powerful. But in this new pattern, they need to learn from the people who have already been farming. And so we get a new kind of mixing of cultures, and that seems to be where we see the mixing of the Vedic religious rituals and what was presumably some previously developed indigenous religious beliefs and practices. We will talk about the result of that in the next mini-lecture, but right now I want to say something about how they justified in their minds this new framework, which must have been very unsettling for a group of people who for so long had regarded themselves as separate and distinct from the dominant peoples in the area. So what we can see on the left side here are the three major groups of people in the Aryan tribes. We have kshatriyas; those would be warriors and leaders of tribes. And they, of course, would have possessed the most wealth and power. We also see Brahmins, and the Brahmins are the priests. And so they would have specialized in more complex rituals that perhaps the Kshatriya warrior caste would have asked them to do, maybe perform some sacrifices to Indra to get some help with an upcoming battle, that kind of thing. So by having specialists, you could maybe have a more effective ritual. But really everybody, all the male heads of the household, would have performed their own basic sacrifices at this time. Lastly, we have the Vaishya, the generic group of everybody else, the herders who wandered around looking for grazing lands, and that made up the Aryan people. What happens in the new social structure is that you have this large group of people who come to be called the Shudras, that are in fact these linguistically different and also racially different, because they've been in India longer, they're darker skinned, they have other indigenous cultures, and they are going to be incorporated not only into the society, but of course that is done through religion. And so what you have here is this bit of text is from the Rig Veda, the earliest complete Veda from the tradition, and one of the earliest religious texts in the history of the world. These early texts go from around 1700 BCE, but they're not really finalized until around 1200, 1100 is when they start to take more concrete written shape. And so in this text you can see it's talking about this figure named Purusha, and Purusha is the cosmic primordial human being, an enormous figure who gets sacrificed in the Vedic fire as a ritual sacrifice. And so what this particular bit of text is saying is that in that process of being sacrificed, his body became different aspects of the human race. And so we have the Brahmins now on top. So they were the kind of a second class in the earlier version, but now they are emerging because they, of course, are the ones who are framing this new system. They're the ones who are reciting the hymns and writing these new materials. So they are at the top of the social order. Not to say they're the most wealthy group, but that they're the most revered group. And they correspond to the head. So the head became this group of people. And then you have the arms becoming the kshatriyas. So very important what we do with our arms, just like the kshatriyas, the warrior and sort of upper class ruler clan. They would be the next most important. You have the Vaishyas, that was the everybody else in the previous version. In this newer version, they may be farmers, they may be merchants. So just sort of the generic mass of people that are made from the thighs and the feet. The lowest part of the body are the new groups of people that have been incorporated into this newer understanding of the Vedic peoples. And so they are the workers, the servants, the people at the bottom of society. So the important idea here is that by bringing them into the mix, they are now exchanging new ideas. And in a minute, I'll come back with the next mini lecture, and you can look and see what the product of that was. We're going to focus on some texts called the Upanishads. But for now, I want you to read carefully what the ritual says here, and you can look over the maps, and then you can get on to the next mini lecture.